Ivan Lewis.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for that answer, but can I say to her that she's developing a very unhealthy habit of making important announcements via the press and not directly to Parliament. This was the case in relation to aid to India only a couple of weeks ago and now Uganda. Can she reassure the House that in future all important statements will be made first to this House of Commons? As the Honourable Lady has said, we've heard disturbing news overnight that the M23 militia are advancing on Goma. Their activities have terrorised the civilian population, led to the displacement of thousands of people, and caused yet another tragic humanitarian crisis in eastern DRC. Successive UN reports have been damning in their criticism of the direct support for these activities by the government of Rwanda, and have also expressed serious concern about the involvement of the Ugandan government. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, the government's policy on this crisis has been nothing short of shambolic, and has seriously undermined the international effort to send a unified and unequivocal message to the Rwandan government that their actions are entirely unacceptable. And the answer, Mr. Speaker, was incredibly complacent here today. Will the Secretary of State now acknowledge that her predecessor's decision to reinstate budget support to Rwanda was a profound error of judgment? Secondly, will she explain that why, according to her predecessor's recent evidence to the International Development Select Committee, this decision was taken despite Rwanda's failure to meet two of the conditions laid down specifically by her own Prime Minister? Those two conditions were namely a public condemnation of M23 and a cessation of all support for their activities by the Rwandan government. Thirdly, will the Secretary of State today stop dithering and make it clear that the next tranche of budgetary support will not be released to Rwanda unless they fully comply with the Prime Minister's own conditions? And finally, what steps has the Foreign Secretary taken to indicate our serious concerns to the government of Rwanda? Is it not now essential that he or one of his ministers calls the Rwandan ambassador to the United Kingdom in for urgent talks? Turning to Uganda, when this government came to power, they made a strong commitment to be tough on corruption. That's absolutely right. British taxpayers have a right to expect that their hard-earned money is going to the poorest, not the bank accounts of the rich and powerful. However, in November of last year, the Independent Commission on Aid Impact, set up by the previous Secretary of State, identified a major gap between the government's rhetoric on corruption and the realities of the measures being taken by her department. So can the Secretary of State tell us now in some detail when these allegations of corruption first came to light? How were they brought to the attention of her department? What estimate has been made of the amount of UK aid which has been siphoned off for inappropriate purposes? And what steps are being taken to recover any losses of British taxpayers' money? What criteria will the Secretary of State apply when deciding whether to reinstate direct financial aid to the Ugandan government? And finally, Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State not feel in the slightest bit embarrassed that a militia is undermining the civilian population in eastern DRC as we meet here today, with the rest of the international community suspending budget support to the government of Rwanda because they are actively supporting that activity, when she is a member of a government that has departed from that international coalition and has sent entirely the wrong message to the President of Rwanda?
The Secretary of State for International Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have to say that I'm disappointed by the tone that the honourable member opposite has taken in relation to this particular matter, which is obviously a very important one. I think his attempt to, frankly, politicise something that is of deep concern to everybody across the House is of a real disappointment, frankly. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that I do, as you know, put all statements through written ministerial statements whenever we believe them to be of a substance that I believe is warranted in this House. In fact, we did indeed make statements to this House, and I will endeavour to continue to do that. And of course, I'm always happy to answer urgent questions on any issues as you see fit. In relation to the issue of Rwanda and general budget support, I should point out that actually under my predecessor, this government has already reduced the amount of general budget support from the levels that we inherited, and that will continue to fall over the coming months. In fact, He talked about the president of Rwanda. This is somebody that a predecessor of mine, I should say a Labour predecessor and colleague of his, called a sweetie. Therefore, I think that Labour has no ability to really criticise us in relation to A, tracking results of our aid, and B, being clear whether it's being spent appropriately or not. And indeed, whenever we have needed to take action to curb aid, we have indeed done that. Now, he may disagree with the reasons for partially putting through some further budget support earlier this year, but I have been very, very clear with the International Development Select Committee, as I was last week, that I will take a look at all the evidence on the ground and indeed from all sources when I come to make my decision in December, and I'm not going to preempt that. And in fact, when I met the Select Committee last week, the situation on the ground in Eastern DRC was different to how it is today. So I believe for him to potentially preempt where we may be in December when I come to take my next decision wouldn't be correct for me to follow suit as he wants me to do. In relation to what conditions we will seek to see adhered to, we've been very clear-cut about both the partnership principles that we struck up with the government of Rwanda and also the PM conditions. I think they're absolutely right, and I will again look at those when I come to take my decision in December. He asked about what steps the government have taken in relation to the Rwandan government regarding the M23. In fact, the Foreign Secretary has spoken with the Rwandan Foreign Minister over the weekend. Now, turning to Uganda, well, I have to say that we have taken action in a timely fashion in relation to suspending aid to Uganda. I presume he doesn't disagree with the decision that I took. No, he clearly doesn't. So I support, I'm delighted he supports the decision we've taken. If I can set out the chronology of what actually happened. In August, we had initial reports around fraud and corruption in relation to the Office of Prime Minister, not in relation to our money, in relation to other donor money. At that stage, we duly suspended our further funding to the Office for the Prime Minister. We initiated, after that, a forensic audit. It's the initial results of that forensic audit that have led me to suspend all aid more broadly to the government of Uganda. It's been a very logical process that has taken account of all the information, but sought always to consider the fact that we still want to make sure that the development work we're doing in countries like Uganda and Rwanda help people on the ground to be alleviated from the extreme poverty that they face on a day-to-day basis. They are often difficult decisions to have to take, but we take them based on the facts that we have at the time and in discussion across government. I hope that answers the questions that he has set, and I look forward to others.